Welcome to Decoding Leadership, where we explore the intersection of humane and effective leadership. I'm your host, Jade Rubik. Today's guest is John Hyland. John is an expert in helping early career engineers be successful. So I asked their advice and experience interviewing and onboarding them. We also did a retrospective on a large project to move a monolith to services. And they shared some thoughts on the Preventable Problems Paradox. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks. I'm excited to be chatting again with you, Jay.
I wanted to start with the Ignite program. This is something that really challenged a lot of my thinking about early career engineers. Very interesting program. Your write-up on the Ignite program, I think, was just a wonderful contribution. It was really helpful. But a lot of people don't know about it. A lot of people are like, Ignite program, what is Jade even talking about right now? Do you mind describing this program, how you got involved, just to the overall kind of contours of it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Ignite, it's not a program that exists anymore, unfortunately.
Yes.
But for a long time, from about 2018 through last year, 2023, it was the early career hiring and placement program at New Relic. I didn't come up with the idea. That was Rebecca Campbell, Trey Zacharias, and Aaron Dietrich. But they thought it would be really good if we had a way to improve our practices around hiring and placing early career engineers. It's really hard to do well. And honestly, we weren't doing it very well. Very few companies do. So they got the ball rolling and they started something called the Ignite Committee. And that was just a group of folks who also thought it was a good idea and were interested in being involved. And so they asked me if I was interested. I was like, well, yes, I am. That sounds like a fantastic opportunity. So for a while, we were just talking about what would this look like? How would we actually do it? Like, how the hiring work, all that kind of stuff. But it didn't exist yet until it did. Eventually, we got the funding, we got approval to go ahead and make it happen. And they needed to have a manager for it. I'd never been a manager, but I really loved the idea of this program. And I'd been thinking about going into management for a long time too, I will say, in at least some small part, because I respected you so much when you were my manager when I first joined you.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, well, that's something I might like to do. So I, tossed my hat into the ring and was lucky enough that they picked me. So from there, we started hiring cohorts of engineers and running them through some of the kind of thing that you don't learn in college or in a boot camp or when you're self-taught about being a software engineer. Because there's all kind of stuff. There's like, how do teams work? What are the different roles? Like, how do you interact with like GitHub and stuff? Not as a solo developer, but as a team together. What is Jira? How does that work? All of those kind of things, as well as going through all of the New Relic specific systems and processes that we had. So that by the time they landed on an actual team, they had all that background. They could really hit the ground running. They didn't need nearly as much onboarding. It would still be some, because there's some things that are specific to any given team that you're still going to have to learn. But they could enter as like fully functioning software engineers rather than being, I just got out of college and I don't know how software engineering actually works yet. So there's always that gap. But if you're not willing to bridge that gap, you're missing out on really amazing talent. Like the folks who are so fantastic that they're not going to be on the job market again, ever, just cold applying anywhere, right? We all know those people, right? They're always, people are headhunting them, people are trying to get them. The only time you're ever going to be able to just snatch them up is into their first job. And you have to help that along a little bit. So that was Ignite. That was the idea. I think it was something that I really believed in as being good for New Relic, like really a lot of value for the company and also beneficial to society. I wanted to open those gateways to get more people into tech, to break down barriers, to make it more equitable, to improve hiring practices, which I don't think we're great generally as an industry. We're not wonderful at that.
No, totally agree with that.
Not for lack of trying, but yeah. So that's a good.
So I know a lot of people almost disparage early career engineers. They're like, basically, I would say there's a pretty big school of thought that's just, they're useless. It's not worth an investment of time. Let somebody else invest the time in these early career people. We basically want to hire the most experienced people we can. Can you give me an idea of what it was like for these engineers and how they integrated and started to participate as engineers at New Relic after going through the program?
Sure. So we followed up on all of our placements with surveys of the engineers themselves and also of the managers where they were placed with. And we tracked for a long time their promotion rates, what kind of reviews did they get, things like that, the retention rates, all of that. And they were off the charts. Every single metric we looked at, if you think of it in terms of an NPS, it was 100%, and that does not happen.
That's impossible
That does not
in
happen.
the world. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. For a long time, like years in, we got one or two cases where things would happen.
Yeah.
But even then, it was rare. And when we looked into it, it wasn't because of anything to do with the engineer. It was because the situation had changed somehow.
Yeah.
So I think part of why people think that it's not worth hiring early career engineers is what I was alluding to earlier, where you got to bridge the gap a little bit. You do have to help them with some of the just norms of how software businesses work. And that does take a little bit of investment. But the other thing is that you do have to know how to, I don't know if make the best use of them is the way to phrase it. But there are certain kind of tasks that an early career engineer is going to be just as good at or nearly as good at as a more senior engineer. And that doesn't mean you should just stick them with all the documentation or nothing else. I'm not saying that. Don't make them just write your tests. That's not the way.
Yeah.
But for things that a senior engineer has done a million times, we need you to go upgrade this library to the most recent version. You say that to a lead engineer and their eyes will glaze over and they'll be like, I guess I gotta, right? No, they don't want to do that. You say that to an early career engineer, they're like, ooh, what is that? How do I do that?
Yeah.
And they're like actually excited to dig into it. You can give them manageable chunks of bigger features, of new feature work, have them go do their thing, review them, help them, have the senior engineer come along and look at it. And the things that would be boring to a senior engineer will be very exciting, very interesting. They'll be very engaged. That helps your senior engineers too. It's not just the early career engineers like providing value to the company by producing code and documentation, which they do. It is also helping the morale of everyone around them because, these people are now doing some of the things that they wouldn't like. They also are a really good forcing function for having to stop and explain things. And that sounds like, you say that out loud, you're like, why would I want to have to stop and talk things through? It's a waste of time, but it's not. It's really not. I cannot tell you how many times having someone in the room say, hey, why do we have to do it that way? Has made people stop and be like, maybe we don't actually. Or why do we do it this way over here, but that way over there? Oh yeah, no, those should be the same. It's the same thing as when you have a new person on your team and all the things that you're just used to. And this new person is looking around with these fresh eyes and will see all the stuff that could be improved, or at least ask you about it so you're aware of it. Early career engineers can do the same thing. They can force you to stop and like really structure your thoughts. They can force you to actually document things, and then they can do that for you, right? I'm not saying don't ever make them write documentation either. I love doing that. When I joined a first team as a principal engineer now, I will go, and what I will do is I will find all the docs, find a big diagram of all the systems, and if it doesn't exist, I'll make it. And even if it does exist, I guarantee it's out of date. So I will go and I will try to update it. And it's a really good way to learn about those systems and how they work and how they fit together and meet all the people who are responsible for them, because inevitably you're like, hey, I see this box on this diagram and there's these 3 arrows, but what does that mean? And they'll explain it to you. And again, this is a great thing for early career engineers to do because you get those documents out of it. Now there's a great system diagram. Now there's all your documentation of your APIs or whatever the case may be. Even if they are providing, let's say they're 80% as productive on certain tasks as a very senior engineer would do, and you're paying them half as much. From a cold-blooded mercenary capitalist perspective, you're coming out ahead. That's a good deal. And they're making the senior engineer more productive in the process. And you know what? Most people like helping other people.
Yeah.
People like to be the expert that shows you the ropes. They like to teach. Not everybody, but lots of people, most people in my experience do. So they're also helping the team cohesion, the team morale. I think that the best teams that I've ever been on, and the most productive teams that I've ever been on, long term, not necessarily short term, but long term, have had a wide range of experience levels from early career all the way to senior. Now, there's exceptions. If you need to optimize for the short term because you're a startup, and if you don't have a product out the door in 3 months, your company will not exist anymore. That may not be the right time to hire early career engineers. And a lot of, so people who are like serial startup folks, I can actually see where they're coming from with that perspective.
Yeah.
But if you have faith that your company is going to exist in a year or 2 years or 3 years, it is a great investment to get these folks while you can, and reap the long-term benefits, the maintainability, the stability of your systems, of having the documents and the updates and everything else that they can bring, and forcing those discussions about things. As well as 3 years from now, if you have got this early career engineer who was amazing, if you're good at hiring them, as a fresh grad from a boot camp or a college or whatever, now they're an amazing senior engineer, and they're the kind that you're never going to be able to just hire. Just open a position and get them. And they know exactly how all your systems work and how your company likes things to get done. It's a really powerful tool to invest in the future of your company. If you believe your company has a future, I think it's always worth it.
That makes a ton of sense. I have to say, I found that the Ignite program actually challenged some of my own assumptions about early career engineers. And it wasn't that I didn't have a lot of evidence. I had seen many examples of interns or bootcamp graduates that had extraordinary impact in pretty short periods of time, or career growth that was just like very unusual. There are a few examples in particular that are actually some of the examples of some of the best engineers I've worked with that came from these kind of unusual backgrounds. But I guess one thing that impressed me about Ignite was, like, it seemed like the managers were really going out of their way to try to get people from the program. And I know there were some hacks behind that, and it might be worth talking about that. There were just a lot of examples of people like very successfully integrating into their teams. And so I'd like to explore a little bit of some of the hacks that you implemented. Might be interesting, which could be lessons for other people setting up these type of programs. And then I would also like to just talk about how to make less experienced engineers more successful, maybe when you don't have something like an Ignite program. To start with, were there any things that about the way the Ignite program was implemented that you think really helped these people be successful beyond giving them this time to understand and work within your internal systems?
Yeah, they definitely were. You mentioned about that managers were going out of their way to get Ignite folks on their team. And that was true eventually. Early on, it was much less so. We really had to iterate on some of the processes. And the other thing that happened over time was that we just built up the track record. Like, we had placed enough people who were amazing and just doing really good. And enough other managers had met those people and been like, wow, these Ignite folks are pretty awesome. Yeah. Maybe I should get some of them on my team. So that was certainly part of it. The other thing that we did was, it goes into kind of how the sausage is made, which is, I guess, this is what we're here to talk about. Yeah. When we first started the program, we had headcount that was assigned to Ignite the team as a holding pool, and that was it. So we would have, I don't know, it was like four headcount or something, and we'd hire a group of 4 people, and we adjusted that number anywhere from 3 to 7 at different times. We experimented a lot, did a lot of iteration. But we'd hire some folks in, and initially it was like, okay, we hire them all on this day, we place them all on that day, and they're just going to be placed in open recs somewhere. So a team has to have an open rec to get an Ignite person, and they have to say, yes, I want that Ignite person in this rec. And that was not great. That was not great at all. And it worked out. We were able to make it work in every situation, but it was not a wonderful experience for, I would say, anybody involved. It felt like a big deadline hanging over people's head, so it was stressful for the people in the program.
Oh, I bet.
Like, what if nobody wants me? Which never happened. But like, it's still, you're concerned about it. It's your first job.
Absolutely. It's anxiety producing.
Absolutely. It was, I knew that they were awesome, but I also knew that it is difficult to predict where open recs are going to be, and it is impossible to predict where they're going to be months in advance. And we had to schedule the rotations that we did, because the way the program worked, we would hire them in, give them a little training, and then rotate through different teams so that they get a chance to work with the team for a little bit, and then at the end we'd place them on a team. But I had to schedule, you can't schedule those the week before, right? You have to give people some notice that's going to happen. But you don't know if there's going to be, okay, 2 months from now, like, is there going to be an opening on this team? I don't know. Is there going to be backfill? Who knows? Maybe. I might have an inkling that there might be, but you don't know. Is extra headcount going to get approved for some team? Possibly. And as a percentage, especially when we first started this program, very few of those open recs were for SE1 entry-level software engineers. So not zero, there were some of those, but not many. And if a manager had one, they were like, I want to hire somebody into this. I don't want to wait 2 months and maybe get someone off of this.
So there's a timing issue.
The timing issue was a real problem. So you either had to get them to hold their rec open and to see if they wanted one of the Ignite folks, which before we had been running Ignite for any period of time, nobody knew what there was no track record.
Yeah. So that felt like a risk, and
yeah. Or they had to downgrade a senior rec, which were much more common for an entry-level person, which again, it's a risk if you don't know what these folks are like, or even if you do, like maybe you need someone with a specific skill set, and like these are brand new folks, they're not going to have specific advanced skill sets yet.
Yeah.
They'll get there, they will get there, but they don't come that way.
Yeah.
And so that was a really, really tricky. It meant that we generally couldn't place people on teams that they'd been able to do a rotation with, which I don't think was ideal. Just because the logistics of it were just too hairy, just too gnarly to actually work. So that wasn't great. So we experimented with, okay, what if we did really short-term planning of some of this stuff? No, that wasn't good. What if we did ask people, okay, hold your recs? No, that wasn't good either. Can we earmark some recs only for Ignite? Like maybe, but now you have to hope that like the exact set of people you have fit into the exact set of recs that are open. That wasn't great either. We tried a lot of different things. The thing that really worked, and this, if anyone's doing a program, this is the thing that I had no idea was what is going to be super key to making it successful, was the way the headcount on the budgeting worked. We really, really, really want to have flexibility with that. And that is not something that your engineering leaders alone can necessarily guarantee. Maybe they can. It depends on how your business is structured. But at New Relic, I had to go and work with TA because their whole hiring process was around teams. I had to go and work with finance about how is the budget allocated. I had to work with engineering leadership, of course, to agree to all of this as a plan. And where we ended up with after all of that was that we had some budget for headcount assigned to Ignite, but then we could place an Ignite engineer on any team that we saw a good fit for. And as we were doing rotations, and then put them on the team. This had two effects. And I'm going to tell you why it was awesome in a minute, but I can already hear a lot of people being, wait, but what about? And I'm just going to address those really quickly first.
Yeah.
You don't want just random engineers being placed on random teams throughout your company with no control, right? Obviously.
Right.
That is not workable. So what we did with that is that I worked with the engineering leadership to say, what are the teams where you might be interested in investing in an early career engineer? So I got that list of teams, and then I would talk to them. Those were the ones that we did the rotations with.
Nice.
And since this was, if you've never been a manager, recs are gold. They're like people grab them and clutch them, and asking someone to part with their hard-won rec, that's a big ask. But offering someone, would you like this bonus rec? That is a completely different scenario. And that set up the dynamic for the new engineer joining that team in a very different way. It was just...
It was like they were being welcomed onto the team because it's like, oh, you're a gift rather than a cost.
Exactly. You're not like, I wouldn't even say a cost, but it's not like, oh, I took a big risk on this. You better pay off, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. It was like, hooray, I get an extra.
Yeah.
Right. Very different dynamic, and I think much more successful. Took a little more forethought. You had to look ahead and be like, okay, we're budgeting next year's budget or whatever. This much of it is going to go here. And you can't lock it till we got these three teams exactly on the three that are going to get it. You have to say, like, of these 6, 3 of them or 4 of them or whatever, right? There has to be some flexibility built in.
Yeah.
And everyone has to be on board with that and okay with it. So it was a little more complicated and took a lot more coordination, but I think the payoff was worth it. I think when you're willing as a leader to reach across those boundaries and to understand the functions of the people in other parts of the company and how they interact with yours. Like I had no idea how like headcount budgeting worked when I took that job. It didn't even occur to me as something that was going to be super critical, but it was. So I had to learn it. I had to talk to those people and have them explain it to me. And I had to change the way that I was thinking about some things. There were some things that were like, this would be a great idea. And then it'd be like, well, maybe it's my little reality, right? But then there were other things where no one had thought of doing it that way, and we were able to work together kind of collaboratively and come up with a new approach that we hadn't done before, that no one had done before. And it worked really well. It was very powerful. Don't step outside your silo. Go walk around. Talk to everybody. I don't think silos are the worst thing for like development patterns. I've read your article on it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
But I do think in terms of understanding how your organization works, silos are bad. You want
Totally.
to know how everyone works that is even remotely touching what you're doing.
Yeah. So, John, you probably have more experience with making less experienced engineers successful than like, you're probably like 99th percentile there or something. When other managers come up to you and they're like, I have a new junior engineer on my team, what should I do in the first 30, 60, 90 days to help them be successful? If you don't have this wonderful Ignite structure in place, what kind of advice do you give them?
I think there's a few things that are really helpful. One is a very common advice. I think it's what most companies do, is to give them an onboarding buddy. Someone who's like, I like to think of the onboarding buddy as your designated interruptible person.
Oh, I like that.
So they can go and it's always okay to ask this person for help. At the same time, I think it's also really good to set some guidance around asking for help. You don't want someone who's asking for help every 5 minutes. That's too disruptive. But you don't want them to feel like, oh, I can't ask for help either. And you don't want them to spin their wheel for days. That means that they're not getting anything done. They're not progressing. So that's not good either. So a rule of thumb I like is if you're stuck for 20 minutes, that's a good time to ask for help. Give it at least a bare minimum 5 minutes, no matter what it is. Don't spin your wheels for more than an hour, no matter what it is. 20 minutes is a good average. So that's one way. And I also like to tell them about how to ask for help effectively so that they're going to get a helpful response, and it's not going to feel like too much of an imposition on whoever is helping out. Most people are happy to help.
Yeah.
But you still want to do it in a way that lowers that threshold for them to actually do it. I think a great format, it's not the only format, but a good format would be something like, here's what I'm trying to accomplish and why. Here's what I've tried so far and what happened.
Oh, nice.
What should I try next? So you don't asking them to come hold your hand through the whole solution. You just want to get unstuck. You just want to start moving forward again.
Oh, that's wonderful. So it seems like there's kind of a point you're making here, which is like giving very explicit patterns that they can follow to be successful. If you run into this problem, talk with this person. If when you're asking for help, seek it out in this particular way. If you're getting stuck, do this. There's some very explicit guidance.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair statement. I think all of us, as we work in our careers for long enough, we kind of generate those patterns for ourselves.
Yeah.
And they haven't had that chance yet. So model it or just tell them, say, here is one way to approach it. You don't have to do it this way, but here's a way that will work and a good starting point. So try this for now. Another thing would be identifying the kind of tasks that they're going to be effective at. There's some things that they are as good as anybody and maybe better even, and that could be documentation, that could be upgrading the library because they're actually interested and excited to do it. And there's other things you wouldn't want your really experienced engineer to do, like maybe don't have them design the architecture for your streaming data platform. Unless that's what they went to college for and they've got a master's degree in it and they think they can do it, give them a shot. But you have to be a little thoughtful about what the tasks are and how much oversight they're going to need for a given task. I think there's a risk with somebody new of going dark. They will come along and they will get stuck on something, like they've got a ticket that's a little bigger and a little thornier maybe than what they've done before, and they're not making much progress on it, and they're afraid to admit it. Maybe they're a little bit ashamed, maybe they're like worried that it's going to be negative performance review or something, and so they're like, oh, I'm just going to power through, I'm going to do it, and they can get stuck in the mud for an extended period of time. So you want to make sure that they feel comfortable and safe in saying, hey, this was bigger and thornier than I thought it was, and I'm not sure how to progress on it. Because that happens to everybody, early career, late career, whatever. That happens to me all the time. And it's fine. But what isn't fine is to not tell anybody that and just be stuck for an extended period of time. So make sure that they know that it's okay to get stuck, and if you see them not communicating for a while, proactively reach out. I would say that applies to everybody. I wouldn't say any different about a mid-level or a senior engineer. I think that if they have disappeared into a hole for a week, poke your head in, see what's going on over there.
Can you tell me about how you interviewed the Ignite program members and what you learned about interviewing and hiring for especially targeted at less experienced people where it's harder to assess their skills?
Yeah, it can be. And I would say, though, that these approaches, not exactly one for one, but really applied at all levels. The Ignite program was so successful at New Relic that we started a program called Launchpad, which was basically taking that same approach of how we did our interview process and how we did the rotations even, and applying it to more senior engineers.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's not just for early career. But a few of the things that we did, we had a fairly standard funnel-shaped hiring process, right? So we have your initial application, and then there would be a recruiter screen and then a hiring manager interview. The recruiter screen is mostly just, you're allowed to work in the United States, right? And those sorts of things. Then there'd be a hiring manager interview. I would give them a very brief code exercise there, very simple. The simplest code exercise that is not quite hello world. So write a loop, reverse the things in this list, something like that, but not like linked list, whatever, like literally just the simplest things you could think. Because I really just want to see, can you write a loop? That's all I'm asking, because you need to make sure they can.
Yeah.
I would not do that with more senior engineers. That was not part of the more senior engineer process.
Okay.
But for early career engineers, and nothing against them, it is really difficult to know like when you are ready. It's really difficult to know. I can write some code. Can I write enough code? Do I have all of this down well enough to get a job doing it? I don't know. I'm never unhappy or upset at someone who is not ready yet, who's not at that level.
Yeah.
But I do need to know. We need to find that out.
For sure.
So we asked them to write a very simple code in that initial hiring manager screen. And then they could also take that opportunity to ask any questions they had about the company or the program or me. It's fine if they didn't. I know some people are like, if they don't ask anything, it's a bad sign. I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
But the opportunity was there because it was an unusual program. There's not many others like it. From there, they had a take-home exercise. The take-home exercise, this is a little bit, some would say contrarian, some would say common sense. I think it just depends on the circles you run in. I run in the circles that would probably call it contrarian. But I think you have to see code from people in a software engineering position. I think that's true at senior levels, but it is super true for early career for the reasons that I just said. It's really hard to know, for them to know if they're ready, if they're at the level that you need them to be at for this role, and you need to find out. You need to find out, and it's useful for them to know too. So we would have them do a take-home exercise. Now, I think there's a lot that you can do very wrong in designing a take-home exercise for candidates along a lot of different axes. I think it is very important that your take-home exercise can be performed in 1 to 2 hours by people at the level you are hiring for.
Right.
And if you're hiring for early career, that means it has to be pretty straightforward. So we calibrated these exercises with engineers that already work there, maybe folks who have come through the program or just other early career engineers. And also with more senior engineers. And all the ones that we had, a senior engineer could do it in 20 to 30 minutes, including tests, all the stuff. And early career, a couple hours typically.
Yeah.
If you go over that, you're going to run into several things. And the most egregious of them is that you are going to be introducing bias into your hiring process, because not everybody has 10 hours to spend on an exercise.
Yeah.
And even if you say only spend an hour, only spend 2 hours, like if it's possible to spend 10 hours and produce a better result, a lot of people will do it.
Yeah.
And the people who are able to do it are those that don't have other responsibilities. They're not caretakers. They have all the privilege and all the opportunity to devote a whole day to just sitting down and polishing this as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. You don't want that for moral and ethical reasons, in my view. And you don't want that for, again, cold-hearted mercenary capitalist reasons, because you don't want to limit your hiring pool.
Yeah.
If you have a hiring process without those biases that is not limited to 1/10 of the potential market. You're going to get 1/10 of the potential candidates that are actually able to complete your process. Whereas if you open it to everybody, you have 10 times the number of people to choose from, and you will get significantly higher quality candidates than your competitor with their bias processes. Whether you take the practical, cold-hearted view, or you take a more, I would say, civic-minded perspective, it makes sense to have your hiring process be as inclusive as possible. That's my rants about take-home exercises. Yes, you need to see code. No, it should not be onerous to complete that exercise.
Yeah.
When they turned those in, at this point, we would actually start doing everything with a blind evaluation. I had a whole series of spreadsheets with evaluation rubrics on them, and like interviewer guides and things. And I think that is also really important. We would anonymize the exercises, and we would give them to reviewers, or I did a lot of the reviews myself. And so, A, you don't know who submitted what code, which again helps to mitigate bias. And B, you have the exact list of things that you were looking for in that code. The variable names clearly indicate what's stored in that variable. Or do they use standard idioms for that language? Whatever. There's a list, and you could give them all a rating from 1 to 5 at each one. You could also leave comments, and we encourage people to do that. And these feedback forms were always shared with the candidates as well. Now, I would look at each one
that's
and
wonderful.
make sure that it was appropriate, that it was all constructively phrased and things like that. But if you would say, no, the variable names are very unclear, we'd be like, since this contains such and such thing, it would be better to do this. Or since we might want to add more states in the future, using a Boolean restrains you to only 2, but if you used a string or an enum, then you could have multiple. It would be much more maintainable and extensible. So that's the sort of feedback we wanted to include.
Nice.
And we always gave that to the candidates. Every candidate got that. And that includes the later steps too. Everything from here forward went into that form.
I love that. That's so helpful. It's giving something back to people for the investment they've made in applying and filling out that, spending a couple hours on a project.
We got so much positive feedback from candidates on that. People who had been rejected, did not get hired, would write us back and be like, this was the best interview experience I've ever had. Thank you so much for all that feedback.
That's awesome.
And we had to fight for it too. Reasonably, there were concerns from legal about, are we going to opening ourselves to a discrimination lawsuit or something, depending on what gets written in here.
Yeah.
So I had to go and explain, here's the process, here's what we do, here's the criteria that I apply to everything that gets written in here, and I will personally review every word that ever goes out, like all that kind of stuff. And they were on board. So again, it's like you're reaching beyond those boundaries, working with people in other functions, understanding where they're coming from and what their concerns are, so that you can either address them or change your plans.
Yeah.
In this case, we were able to address them.
That's amazing.
So that's the take-home exercise. In the final interview, this was originally in person, and then of course everything went online. We would add a feature to the code, so we would see them code live. And I will say again, this is one of those maybe contrarian, maybe common sense. People hate that. People hate live coding exercises.
Yeah.
Not everyone, but like 95% of people hate them. They're just super stressful. And I think it is very important that you mitigate the stress of an interview process as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And same as before, this is both for humanitarian reasons, because this is a person going through a very difficult process, and it's a very stressful day in their life, and it's a hard experience to go through. And you want to make it, as a human being, as you want to have them suffer as little as possible. And also, as a hiring manager that wants to be able to accurately gauge their true abilities and what they will actually be able to do and what their performance is going to be like in realistic job environment, you're not under that much stress in your normal job environment. It's nothing like that. Never as much as maybe if it's 3 a.m. and the website is totally down or whatever, but that's 0.01% of the time, hopefully. Yeah. So you want to see what they actually know. You want to see how does the code actually look when they're not freaking out. And that means you want them not to be freaking out. You want them not to be so stressed out as much as you can.
Yeah.
It's not easy. But I really wish that we could have avoided the live coding exercise. I really looked at what are some other things that we could do? What are some other ways that we could do this? Is it enough just to have the take home and maybe they can talk about it? Is it whatever? But it is so hard to get an objective measure of them talking about the code And there are some people who are really good at talking a good game, and they are not able to write code. And that is true of senior engineers, but it is extra true of early career for whatever reason. I think it just goes back to not everyone is ready. And I can also say with a fairly high degree of confidence that at least once or twice we got someone who would come in with a take home that looked great, and they did not know how that thing worked.
Yeah. But
why?
it happens.
I mean, I have theories. Yeah, it happens. It happens. It's a thing. And AI code generation or whatever, I'm sure people are using it. And to be frank, I don't care if they do. What I care about is not how you came up with some code. I care that you are able to produce production grade, professional quality code, that you are able to effectively communicate about it and explain it, and that you can do that repeatedly.
Yeah.
The exact process does not matter to me. But if you are not able to write that code from scratch, it is really unlikely that you would be able to effectively communicate it or verify that it actually is doing what you expect it to do, or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So we would have that, and then we would also have a behavioral interview, which is a very standard, tell me about a time when you blah, blah, blah. Everyone does those. We had the same kind of rubric for that. I mean, here's the questions. Here's exactly what we're looking for in an answer. If you get an answer that's too brief, like a sentence or two, here are some optional follow-ups that you could ask to draw it out a little bit more, and there'd be like 8 questions, which almost no one ever made it all the way through, which was by design. We wanted to have, better to have too many than too few.
Yeah.
And then the final one, which was actually my favorite interview type of thing that I've ever done. I loved doing this. I did all of them because it was really hard to make these objective when you had a bunch of different people doing them. But there'd also always be a secondary person in the room. I would just have them explain something to me. And it had a rubric too. Could they answer questions well? Were they able to have a coherent thread of the narrative and maintain that through the conversation period? But the idea, it wasn't like a presentation. There was no slides. There was nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was meant to be very conversational, some give and take. And everyone was warned about this. It was like, this is not a presentation. This will be a conversation. There will be questions asked. And it was supposed to replicate the kind of environment where you're a software engineer and you have to maybe explain how the systems that you maintain work to the new person who just joined your team.
Yeah.
Or maybe an executive came and was like, hey, I need to make an important decision about this. Can you explain this concept to me? Or something like that, which happens all the time as an engineer. But we don't really interview for it, but it's a critical skill.
Yeah.
So we would have those, and they were so fun. I'm glad that they were so effective because they were so much fun. People would come and I learned about so many things. How pizza is made, for example. And you can do that well in this example, or you can do it poorly. You just give me a step-by-step, here, let's step to make a pizza. That's not a good technical explanation of something. It's just a how-to book. But I had one person, we ended up hiring this person who came in and she told me all about how the gluten network is formed in the dough as the things can. Here's the things that can go wrong and here's how you fix them and here's why it works this way.
Oh, wow.
That was amazing. That was awesome, right?
Yeah.
And I really felt like I understood pizza better. But there was technical details there. There was like, I could drill down and get into what is the molecular chemistry going on in this process? So it didn't have to be about computers. We usually recommended that people do pick something computer related because it was too easy to get off into an area where we can't really drill down and we can't get that depth that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Or we want to see that they can explain an abstract concept, and so there has to be an abstract concept there to explain. But if they really wanted to, they could talk about anything they want. And some of them were awesome. One of our very first, he told me how a mass spectrometer worked because that's what he did at his previous job. It was so cool.
Oh my God, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So yes, we needed to see the technical skills. But you're going to see a lot of people with the technical skills that you want. You need to have other things to help narrow that down. And you also, I think people over-index on the technical skills. Yes, there's a bar. Like you have to meet that minimum level of technical ability. But I think if you're a really smart engineer, you are going to be able to pick things up and learn them very fast. And whether you're at the very beginning of that curve or a little farther down the curve, I don't really care. I care that you're able to learn and that you're able to communicate effectively, because that's what we under-index on as an industry in hiring,
Totally.
in my opinion. So in that initial application, there was a writing example. I had to see, and it was basically the same as the explanation. Explain something to me, a technical concept, or I had to see that I could tell what they built, what were the parts of it, how did it fit together. It had to be succinct. I don't want an English essay from college that's 5 paragraphs because it has to be 5 paragraphs and I double-spaced it. I want you to communicate effectively in the briefest amount of time, not the most.
Yeah.
I didn't really care about the grammar. It's fine if it's not English as your first language or whatever, that doesn't matter. But you do need to be able to communicate effectively. And then in the final interview, we would do the same thing. And that really helped us to find the people who were going to perform well. As early career engineers, especially, because they need to be able to communicate. They need to be able to talk to people and figure things out and learn. But that is still important as a senior engineer. Like, you have to be able to explain things really well. You have to be able to pitch your architecture to the rest of the organization and tell them why it's a good idea and why it's going to solve these problems, and help them understand and bring them all on board. I would use a very similar process for much of that at any level of hiring.
Yeah, that's one thing that really stands out to me, is that it seems like a lot of this was just like really well done in general, and it was focused on early career engineers. But like, I also think about bundled hiring, for example, and that was another example of, it was just basically just really good management work that, like, it kind of systematized good results.
Yeah, I think we built on some of that bundled hiring stuff. We talked to all the people that were involved, that were around at the time when we were doing the Launchpad program later on for the all levels.
And do you mind just telling people what bundled hiring is, since I didn't?
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. So the idea with bundled hiring is that when you have a set of similar roles and you want to hire them all at once, rather than having each manager individually hire one role at a time. And it has a few advantages. It's a lot easier to get representation into a group. When you are only hiring one person, it's much less likely that you're going to hire someone from an underrepresented group, just statistically, empirically, when you look at studies, they've shown this.
Yeah.
And there's other efficiencies that you can pull out of it too. I think it does have some drawbacks. Some of the things that came up when we were interviewing managers who had been involved with the bundled hiring at Relic, for example, it was sometimes really hard to tell what step of the process and a candidate was with what managers, and what if two managers both want the same candidate, or like, how the coordination and the logistics got a little hairy with it. And those were things that we tried to address as we were building the Launchpad thing, which is similar in some ways, because we're continuously hiring people in, and then they're not for a specific team. So there's a lot of overlap there in those approaches.
There is a lot of similarities.
And also just breaking that hard link between we've hired this person and we've placed this person, that is something that requires a little bit of a different mindset, and also just a different paperwork, a different process of how to coordinate everything. If you're going to hire them and then you don't know where they're going yet.
Yeah.
It's just a little different. What do they do in the meantime? Stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I wanted to switch to another topic. You and I think, first started to working together on a initiative at New Relic that was called SeaWorld. And
the Orca teams.
The Orca team, that's right. Which was a wonderful team. I have such fond memories of that time. That was another of those kind of really great teams. But this initiative was a multi-team effort. I think at its height, there were about 20, 25 engineers involved in it. And it was this big push at New Relic towards breaking up a monolith and moving towards services. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to just spend a few minutes just retrospecting on that and seeing what we could take from it, because I've mined it a lot over the years for insight, and I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah. First off, I have to agree with you. That was an amazing team. I think I'm still friends with every single person from that team.
Yeah.
Like, actively in contact with. Yeah. So like you said, it was an initiative to deconstruct a monolith into services. And I think they did a lot of things right. I don't know. Leadership did a lot of things right.
Yeah.
They devoted the resources. They recognized that's a hard problem and a big problem. And they had multiple teams that were just focused on making it easy to make that succeed. They had a team that was just based on tooling for that process, which I think was a great decision. It did not work out.
Yes. It was about a year long. And at the end of it, it was kind of like, mission accomplished, but not really. Yeah.
Not really. Yeah. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why. Like, so much effort was spent and so many things were done really well and the people were brilliant, like really good folks working on it.
Yeah.
And yet the result was not what we hoped. Why? And I think it's down to a few different things. One is just simply, we didn't have a great idea of how to decompose something of that scale. So it was a little bit, not completely untrodden ground, but not well trodden. A lot more people have decomposed a lot more monoliths today than they had back then.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. That's easy to say, kind of glib. I don't know, there's a lot of lessons to learn there. I think we waited way too long to do it. I think that when you have a large-scale architectural change that you want to make, you should make it as soon as it would be a little painful to do. Because if you don't do it when you're like, oh man, I really don't want to do that, that's a lot of work. But it's the first time you say that. If you wait until later, it's not going to be less work. It's going to be more, it's going to be harder. And so we waited way too long. That was a big ball of mud, and the mud was full of snakes. It was not fun to work with. Trying to decompose it was really hard to pull apart. And I think part of it too, and I already said we had a team that was devoted just to tooling, but I don't think it was the kind of tooling that we actually needed. What we had was tooling that was going to make it easy to work in the new world. Ooh, we have service discovery tooling. That'll be really important when we have services.
Yes.
Ooh, we'll have like all this stuff that will be a great thing to have eventually. What we did not have was the kind of scaffolding and tooling that made the process of getting from here to there go smoothly and easily. I actually believe pretty strongly, and I've seen this play out in many scenarios, including this one, that it is probably more important to set up your environmental pressures such that your systems will evolve in the direction that you want them to be. It is more important to do that than to build the good system in the first place. And in fact, often it is impossible to build a good system in the first place. You simply cannot do it. It is too much work. It is too complex. There's too many other things and competing priorities going on at the same time. And it's all evolving all the time. And so you can't stop the world and, okay, now we're going to take it all apart while everything is sitting still and behaving itself. Okay, now everything's starting. No, that's not how companies work. That's not how businesses work. They're always moving. They're always going. What you can do is you can direct that motion. You can direct that evolution in the direction you want it to go. And that's the tooling that I don't think we had. I think we were missing that perspective.
So what would an example of that be? Like, would it be something that prevented the problem from getting worse, or like some patterns so that decomposition in the future would have been easier?
Yes.
To me, that
I like the way you set me up with that question. Yes, those would help. I think patterns, standards, guardrails, those things are helpful, but they won't get you there.
Yeah.
What really helps is my favorite phrase for anyone building tools is that you want to make the right thing the easy thing. I didn't come up with that. Most people probably heard that. It's all of course. But that's important. We did eventually, and you're like, end up with an extremely service-oriented architecture. Everything was heavily decomposed. There was a little kernel of the original thing left still when I left, but it was a mere shadow of its former self, and I think could have relatively easily been split out the last few things. And how we got there was we built a few things. One of them was called the Service Gateway, and the Service Gateway did a ton of stuff. It was kind of a wrapper around services. So it would handle authentication and things like that. But the thing that was important for this specific case was that it would do request routing based on URL paths, which sounds like, okay, so what? Why that was important, and you could also do it conditionally based on things like feature flags. It would make it very easy to set up a new service with just some part of the original monolith. It could just show the exact same HTML. It could just serve as the same content, but from over there. And then you turn on a feature flag, and suddenly all your traffic goes to the new thing. And you're like, whoops, it doesn't work. And you turn the feature flag back off, and it goes back to the old thing. Very easy. Fast, easy rollback. Super important. Easy way to transparently, invisibly switch over between which component is serving your system. Very important. Those are the things we didn't have originally. And those are the things that made it possible to evolve that system gradually, piecemeal, a bit at a time, opportunistically, towards the desired end goal. Another example, I would say, of when we did something like that was with NerdGraph. NerdGraph was a GraphQL API gateway. The important part of this is that it was an API facade. It took all of the various APIs that existed behind it, and it presented a single facade. And you could go to that And it was very similar to the service gateway. It would tell you, oh, okay, I need this data. It's going to come from over there. And that means you can move that around. You can serve that data from wherever you want. As long as the gateway knows where to get it, that's fine. And so it makes it easy to pull a bit out and put it over there, make sure it works. Does it work? Oh, okay, it does work. Great. Let's pull a little more out. Let's pull a little more out. Let's pull a little more out. And there was a lot of tooling around that. There was a lot of tooling to make it really easy to run it locally. There's a lot of tooling to make it really easy to do a lot of that stuff. And the other like key ingredient here, the make the easy thing the right thing, is that if you used Service Gateway, we would handle all the authentication for you. We would look up all the relevant feature flags for you. We would do all the, we would handle cores for you, which if you've ever done front end work, that's a big headache you don't have to worry about. We would do all kind of stuff that made it really nice. People would get behind the Service Gateway, not because we told them they had to. They would be like, I want to be behind that so that it will save me a bunch of time.
Mm.
And it was especially true, I think, with things like our very heterogeneous environment. So like we would have some Node services, we would have some people running Ruby, some people running Java. We would acquire other companies and they would have whatever they had.
Yeah.
And keeping libraries for all that functionality, like up to date and in lockstep across 5 different languages, not going to happen. Like not without a huge investment and headaches for the rest of your life. But if you can centralize that, all those cross-cutting concerns into a single code base, a single product, then it's much easier. People can do the part of the code that they care about, that they want to do, their actual features and functions, and leave all the infrastructural stuff to the infrastructure.
That's so interesting. So it seems like the insight there is that by putting in place enabling technologies that push the behavior in the direction that you want to, when you can identify those, everything else comes automatically. Like it takes real work. There's real things that have to happen. But that was missing early on. Early on, we were figuring out all sorts of other things that ended up, some of those actually were valuable and some of them weren't, but they didn't really transform the problem space in the same way.
I agree.
I've wondered if there might have been an equivalent of that in a leadership sense, which was like, when we kicked off SeaWorld, it was this huge initiative, like all at once, all these teams immediately focusing on it. And I've sometimes wondered if you could have basically, there's this weird idea that I've had, and I want to get your idea of whether this would have actually worked. The idea was this: every person kicking off a project had to consider whether they could do it in a servicified way. And if they couldn't, they had to tell a single person that is responsible for enabling tooling why they couldn't. Mm-hmm. And then the person doing that tooling team basically would focus on things like Service Gateway or other sort of enabling technologies that would, a user service, for example, or whatever was necessary to decouple future project work. You would have just it would all be funneled into one brain that could be doing the work to remove those obstacles.
That's funny you say that. That's what we did with the Service Gateway. I was
really?
the tech lead and the technical product manager on that team. We set up weekly lunches with people on the team. Again, we want this to be something people want to do, so hey, we'll buy you lunch. And they would come and sit with us. And the people that we picked were teams that were not using Service Gateway.
Oh my God.
But that we thought could. And so we'd talk to them, we'd buy them lunch, and be like, hey, you're not using Service Gateway, that's fine. You don't have to. But we would like it to be something you want to use. We want it to make your job easier. And it seems like it's not. So like, why is that? Is there some feature that you need that it doesn't have? Is there some obstacle, some architectural things keeping you from doing it? Do you need help? Have you not heard how great it is?
Yeah.
And that was incredibly valuable. It was super useful. And the whole team was involved with that, but I was definitely the one who drove the process.
That is so interesting.
Collated it all. Yeah.
I swear I wasn't setting this up.
I believe it, yeah.
That's so interesting.
I had a thought too. It's a half-formed thought that I had in the process of this conversation in the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to attempt to convey it. It may come out a bit a little garbled.
Great.
But I think maybe part of why we were successful eventually, but not initially, is that engineering organizations are always to some extent going to self-organize. You're going to give them a goal. They're going to try to accomplish that goal, and you can try to micromanage them. But at some level, I don't think it's good to try to do so too much.
Yeah.
I think leadership should set a North Star and be like, that's where we're going, and then people just self-assemble into the constructions that need to happen to make it do that. This is more complicated, and you need some levels of management and stuff, obviously. But from an engineering perspective, I think that's what should happen. And early on, it was this centrally driven, here's the plan, you're going to do this and this and this.
Yeah.
And that did not work.
Yeah.
What worked was when we said, okay, self-organize, you make the decisions. How do we accomplish these goals? And by the way, we're going to make it really easy to do it this way.
Yeah.
And so we were empowering people to self-organize to accomplish our long-term goals, and willing to learn if the ways that we were empowering didn't work out. If like, oh, that's actually not helpful, John, please don't do that. Okay, what would be better? And try to figure out a way to do it where we're helping them accomplish the goals that have been set to them, rather than constraining them and keeping them from doing things the way they want to, if that makes sense.
I love that you brought this up, because I had this conversation recently where it's a little bit associative, but I don't know if you remember, God, might have been the late 90s or early 2000s. There was this essay, I think by Eric Raymond or something like that, about the Cathedral and the Bazaar, and how that applies to open source development, and how the basic thesis is that Cathedral is like this constructed artifact, that it's like the way that software was traditionally built, where everything was planned and it was done much more like rigorously and planfully. And the Bazaar is this bustling place like open source software where everything is self-assembled, and people are just chaotically volunteering their time or their energies according to their whims or their personal desires. And yet these kind of crazy things can emerge from it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I found that sort of way of looking at things, like the Cathedral versus the Bazaar, as like a sort of way of looking at problem spaces, or how you might address a problem, as a useful metaphor. And it seems like early on for SeaWorld, we approached it like a cathedral project, where it was like, okay, we need to get our designs in place, and we need to organize our teams around this, and we need to organize in that particular fashion. And there were some things that came out of that were good, and there were some ways that was effective. But I guess in retrospect, it seems to me it's often best to really look at your problem and identify which of those forms of problem solving make the most sense. In this case, I think the Bazaar approach might have been a lot more effective, because you had all of these independent teams operating with their own needs and their own like agendas. And there might be some classes of leadership problems where it makes a lot of sense to design things. And there's also ways that you can hybridize them. What do you think about that? Is that a weird way of putting it?
No, I love that essay. It was definitely one of the formative things for me to read way back in the day. I do take a little bit of a different perspective.
Wonderful. I want to hear it.
And you touched on it with your very last couple of words there about hybridizing them. I think for me, that is kind of the key. Because for a long time we said, I think, hey, we want everything to be service oriented, everybody.
Didn't happen.
The Bazaar did not happen. Yeah. So, sometimes you could do that. Sometimes you could just express a desire, or not even just let people do whatever they think is correct and see good things happen. Like that can absolutely work for some scenarios. And occasionally maybe you need something more like the Cathedral. But I think probably more often you want something in between.
Yeah.
You want the people to feel like they're in the Bazaar and that they have the freedom of the Bazaar to do whatever they want. But you are also the city planner. And so you're like, here's the road layout.
Right.
And here's where there's a bunch of building supplies. They're just here.
Right.
Look, building supplies. Hey, water and power hookups here and here. I'm just saying. And then work with them and think about it. And you can't foresee everything, so adjust as needed, of course. But having that kind of organized chaos, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love that.
I think is the most powerful way to take advantage of both of those approaches.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a very nice way of putting it. And it gets back to what you were saying about putting environmental pressures on a system, like to make things go the right direction. There's a way that you can harness both of those energies to get at what really works well for humans is something in between often. Before we go, there was one last topic you wanted to talk about, and that is called the Preventable Problems Paradox, which is hard to say. Preventable Problems Paradox.
Yes, it's true. Maybe that is the reason you don't hear people talking about it more, because I think it is one of the central ideas of engineering leadership, frankly. And for years, I was seeing this pattern, and I had strong feelings about it and would try to explain it, and it came out garbled, and I was very bad at it. And then I saw this talk from, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but I think it's Shreyas Doshi.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Great. I hope so. If not, I'm sorry, Shreyas. And he gave this talk, and it was amazing. And it was like, that is exactly what I've been trying to say for years. That was perfect. And I'm not going to try to replicate it here, of course. But the basic idea is that when things are catastrophically failing, and somebody swoops in and saves the day, like Superman, they get highly rewarded. If that is a very visible success. They have come in and they have performed superheroics, and obviously superheroes are great. You need to reward those people, and legitimately, sometimes emergencies happen, and someone does come in and save the day, and you need to reward those people. But also, it would be way better as a company if those problems didn't catastrophically start failing in the first place. That would be much preferable. But if you as an engineer or a manager or anyone come in and be like, I did the normal things and nothing went wrong, you don't get rewarded in nearly the same way.
Yeah.
You don't get the recognition, you don't get the promotions, you don't get any of that stuff. And that really incentivizes people to not focus on preventing those problems, to not focus on things like reliability, things like stability, things like the extensibility and maintainability of the systems, of the engineering systems that they are responsible for. They focus on, oh, this thing is on fire, and I went in and I prevented the whole site from going down. Yay me. And yes, yay you. Like, do that. Don't just let the site go down. But as leaders, I don't think that we do very well in this industry of showing the same compensation or the same recognition of the efforts that prevent those fires from happening, which is ironic because it is so much preferable, so much better. It is so much more valuable to a company to not have those catastrophic failures in the first place. And that in a somewhat haltingly explained nutshell is the preventable problem paradox. It's preventable problems, and it's a paradox because we don't prevent them, and obviously we would want to.
And in a way, we really incentivize them to happen.
Yeah.
I wonder what are some approaches that leaders can take to reduce those incentives?
That's a good question. It's a lot harder to measure the problems that don't happen.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible. I think you can look at reliability and maintainability of the system over time. You can look at velocity. You can reward the people who are responsible for systems that maintain high reliability, high stability, that maintain high velocity. That's a little tricky. Sometimes things just legitimately get more complex and your apparent velocity is going to go down. I think this is legitimately very hard to measure.
Yeah.
And so we don't, and that's why this happens. I know Shreyas has a lot of suggestions in his talk, which I would say anyone should go check out. I will try to summarize them here.
Yeah.
But it's worth seeing what he has to say on the matter. I think that half of it is probably just an awareness of it. Like once I had already been thinking about this, but once I saw that talk, it really crystallized it for me, and I started seeing it everywhere.
Interesting.
And that awareness, I would say, would be the most important first step.
Yeah, it does seem like something you can solve partially culturally. And so just creating an awareness of it or talking about it as a leader could pay off quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Very visibly recognize the people who are quietly doing the Clark Kent work of not being a superhero and just preventing disasters from happening in the first place.
Yeah.
Visibly recognize them.
It reminds me of a story. I had this person that I was managing. He was doing IT, And I went to the president and I was basically talking him up or trying to get him a raise or something like that. And he was like, why would we give him a raise? Like, we don't have any IT problems here. Everything works great. And I was like, oh, yeah, that is true. But you might want to think about it this way. He's doing a great job.
That is such the perfect illustration. Yeah.
Awesome. John, I really want to thank you for being on the show today. This was a lot of fun. I learned a ton, and there's a lot that we discussed today that I just really want to share with people. To finish this off, how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
Sure. Probably the easiest way, my online handle in all of the places is DJ Spin Monkey. Chosen in my 20s, but I still love it. And so I'm on GitHub, on obviously not Twitter anymore, but Mastodon, Hackaderm, the usual other places, I think.
Awesome. Thank you again. I really enjoyed this.